this morning's Dharma talk in English is on cultivating Saddha, Sila, Samadhi, Panna by Venerable Dr. Punnaji. Venerable Dr. Punnaji is a humble and unassuming Buddhist monk, unquestionably an intellectual giant of modern times, and perhaps one of the foremost among today's world authorities on Buddhism. He is a teacher par excellence and continues to draw from an inexhaustible resource of science, philosophy, psychology, and world history. Trained in meditation at the island hermitage, Dodan Dua, Bhante Punnaji studied modern science and Western medicine, and obtained 2 doctorate degrees while in the United States, one in psychology and the other in Western philosophy and comparative religion.
Say Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa 3 times. Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Saṅghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Saṅghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Saṅghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Pānātipātā viramani sikkhapadam samadhiyami. Adinādāna viramani sikkhapadam samadhiyami. Kāmesu micchācārā veramani sikkhapadam samadhiyami. Musāvādā viramani sikkhapadam samadhiyami. Suramere Majja Pamadatthana Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami. Tisaranena sadding pancha silang dhammang sadukang surakkitang katva appamadena sampadeta.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
We have just taken refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma and the Sangha and taken the 5 precepts. When we speak of the teachings of the Buddha and following the teachings of the Buddha, there are 4 main stages which can even be described as 5 stages. But these 5 stages, the Buddha described in 2 ways. One for the layman and one for the monks. The 5 stages for the layman is described as Saddha, Sila, Sutta, Chaga and Panya. Saddha refers to taking refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma and the Sangha. Sila refers to disciplining your behavior, disciplining the behavior, that is, observing the 5 precepts, is disciplining the behavior. Sutta refers to studying the teachings of the Buddha. We began to understand the teachings of the Buddha. Chaga is giving up attachments to things, sacrificing things for others, helping others with your strength or giving up what you have to help others letting go of attachments, that is all coming under Chaga. And then Panya refers to understanding the Dhamma in the proper way, which is to understand three things: anicca, dukkha and anatta. Anicca means that everything in the world comes and goes, arises and decays. Dukkha means that whatever happens in the world is not happening as we want. That is, our desires are in conflict with the realities of life. The reality of life is that it comes and goes. Now, we want things to be permanent, but everything is impermanent and not behaving as we want. So that makes us unhappy. And the third is anatta, which means that we do not own anything in the world. We cannot possess and own things. Even our own body is not behaving as we want. It is not really under our power. And if it is not under our power, it is not something that belongs to me. It is not mine. The body is not mine, and even the mind is not behaving as we want. So there is nothing that we call mine in the world. That is why there is nothing to call myself. So understanding these things in life, we give up all attachments to things. And that brings an end to all suffering, all unhappiness. Now these are the 5 things: Saddha, Sila, Sutta, Chaga and Panya. We have a problem in life. That is the insecurity of life. The insecurity of life is that everyone that is born in the world has to grow old, fall sick, and die. That is not what we want. So our desires are in conflict with the realities of life. This is the insecurity of life. All religions are an effort to solve this problem, the insecurity of life. There are two kinds of religions in the world. What are today called theistic religions and humanistic religion. Theistic religion is religion that is based on the belief in supernatural beings called gods. People begin to pray to these supernatural beings. Why? Because they want to change the realities of the world. They want to change nature to suit their desires. So if you want to change nature, you need a supernature to do that. And human beings don't have a supernature. So if they don't have a supernature, they'll have to believe in supernatural beings and pray to the supernatural beings to change the nature of the world. This is why they believe in supernatural beings. No one has seen a god or a supernatural being, but they believe in supernatural beings. Why? Because people need the help of supernatural beings to change nature. Because our desires are in conflict with nature. Nature is that everything that is born begins to grow old, fall sick, and die. We want to stop that. So this is why we need supernatural beings to stop that. All our life, we are struggling to change nature. But it is a failure because we cannot change nature. Everyone has to grow old, fall sick, and die. But today, with the advancement of human intelligence, we are having a thing called science. And with this science, we have been able to obtain energy to do what we want. The first kind of energy that we begin to use is what is called fire. When we want to cook our food, we need fire. When it is cold, we need fire to warm our surroundings. So the first thing that human beings did was to produce fire. In ancient times, it was very difficult to produce fire. They only had to rub two sticks together and keep on rubbing till a flame came up. But today, we have what is called a matchstick. We only have to strike the match and the flame comes up. That happened because the human intelligence was able to find a law of nature. That law is that everything that happens in the world happens only when the necessary conditions are present. So when they wanted the flame, they inquired, what are the conditions necessary for a flame to arise? And they provided the conditions. That is how they made the matchstick. But later the human beings came to know about another interesting thing. That interesting thing was what is called electricity. First they saw lightning, and they didn't know what lightning was. They thought lightning came from God, the creator of the world. When there was thunder, they thought God is angry or something. But gradually people began to find out. One person made use of a wire and fixed that to a kite that they sent into the sky. When there was thunder and lightning, the kite was sent up with the electric wire, and he got electricity from the wire. And that is how gradually electricity was discovered, and they were able to build a light, electric light, by making a bulb. They got the electricity, and they learned to make what is called a battery, where electricity could be produced. And so on. Now today we have these electric lights when we want light. We have the fan when they want the fan. We have the air conditioning. All kinds of things became possible with the coming of electricity. And now we have motor vehicles. We can run at very high speeds with the motor vehicle. And we have all kinds of machines going on. So the human beings made use of that intelligence to produce the machines. And now we can even fly in the air. In ancient times, people saw the birds flying, but the human beings couldn't fly because they didn't have wings to fly. Then someone created what is called the aeroplane. And now we can fly from one country to another. And people could travel in ships. And recently, the human beings even went to the moon. And now they are trying to go even beyond the moon to other planets. And with all this, they have even created what is called the nuclear bomb. They can even destroy the world making use of the nuclear bomb. With all these powers that they have got, has the human being become happy? Has crime disappeared in the world? Has war disappeared in the world? Has terrorism disappeared in the world? No. So the power has not solved the problems of life. This power came because the human beings discovered a natural law, which is that everything that happens in the world happens only due to the presence of the necessary conditions. And when they discovered the conditions necessary for something to happen, they can make that happen. And they made use of this law to change nature, to control nature. But by controlling nature, they have not solved the problem. Long before the people in the West came to know about this law, which is called determinism, it was the Buddha in the East who came to know this law of determinism. But he didn't call it determinism. He called it the Paticca Samuppada. That word Paticca Samuppada means that when the conditions are present, it comes into being. When the conditions are absent, it ceases to be. It's the same law. But he did not make air conditioning. He did not make motor vehicles. He did not make airplanes. Why is that? A certain person came to the Buddha and said, "You have great powers. If you make a wish, may this great Himalaya mountain become a mountain of gold. You only have to make that wish and it will become a mountain of gold." So, out of compassion for these suffering beings, please make that wish. So the Buddha said, "Yes, you have understood that I have such powers. That is true. But do you know that if I use that power, do you know how many people will be killed as a result? Because I cannot satisfy one person. Many people will want to own that mountain of gold, and there will be wars. And so many people will be killed as a result. This is why I do not use that power. Instead of using that power, I use the power to do something else. I teach people how to control their minds. that knowledge is used to gain control over the human emotions. It is by learning to gain control over the human emotions that you can change the human being so that there will be peace and happiness in the world. The peace and happiness is not by controlling nature. It is by controlling the human mind. It is the emotions that create all the unhappiness in the world. It is only by learning to gain control over the emotions that we can have peace and happiness in the world. And this is what the Buddha taught. And it is to learn that we take refuge in the Buddha. To take refuge in the Buddha is not to take refuge in power. To take refuge in the Buddha is to take refuge in the wisdom of the Buddha. We take refuge not in the powers of the Buddha. We take refuge in the wisdom of the Buddha. It is the wisdom of the Buddha that we call the Dhamma. Dhamma is the wisdom of the Buddha, not the power of the Buddha. All these other religions that worship the creator of the world or the gods, supernatural beings, they are seeking refuge in power. That doesn't help. Power is necessary to change nature, to control nature. But wisdom is necessary to control our mind. That is how the teaching of the Buddha differs from all other religions. Because all other religions are seeking power. It is only the teaching of the Buddha that takes refuge in the wisdom of the Buddha. That is why the Buddha is considered to be the wisest person in the world. So, the first thing that we do is to take refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Buddha is the person who became wise. Dhamma is the wisdom of the Buddha. And the Sangha represents the followers of the Buddha. Because the wisdom of the Buddha is not here now, but he has left the wisdom in the form of the Dhamma. But where can we get the wisdom? From the Sangha. It is the Sangha that preserves the wisdom of the Buddha and spreads the wisdom to the world. Carries the wisdom of the Buddha through the many generations, from past, present, and future. So once we take refuge in the Buddha, we are taking refuge in the Dhamma. And when we take refuge in the Dhamma, we take refuge in the Sangha. And to take refuge is to begin to practice the Dhamma. And to begin to practice the Dhamma is to begin to discipline our behavior. That discipline of behavior is what is called Sila. Sila is the discipline of behavior. Because we are carried away by emotions. To discipline behavior is to gain control over the emotions. And to gain control over the emotion is to constantly look within. The emotions are within us, not outside. If we begin to look outside, either we become attracted to what we see, or we are repelled by what we see. The more we become attracted or repelled, we are carried away by emotions. So instead of looking outside, we have to look inside to observe how we react to what we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. It is by observing the reaction that we can gain control over the reaction. That constant introspection that is the important thing. That introspection is what is called Satipatthana, which is today translated as mindfulness. Mindfulness is a wrong word to translate the word Satipatthana. The Western scholars who came to translate these things, they didn't understand the word Satipatthana properly. So they called it introspection, mindfulness. Mindfulness is to fill the mind. What we have to do is not to fill the mind, but to empty the mind. empty the mind of emotions. That is to calm the mind, to make the mind tranquil. To do that, what we need is look within. And that means introspection. So Satipatthana means introspection. And by practicing introspection means to look at what are we thinking, what are we speaking, what are we doing, to constantly watch our thought, our speech, and our actions. It is by constantly watching our thoughts, speech, and actions that we can gain control over our thoughts, speech, and action. That is disciplining ourselves. And this disciplining ourselves leads to calmness and tranquility of mind. And that calmness and tranquility of mind is what is called samadhi. But today, the English translators missed the point again. They translate samadhi as concentration. Samadhi is not concentration. Samadhi is tranquility of mind. There is a big difference between concentration and tranquility. Tranquility is the stillness of the mind. The mind that is not agitated. The mind that is calm and tranquil. And with the calmness and tranquility of mind comes relaxation of the body. The body becomes relaxed and the mind becomes calm. That is samadhi. And it is when the mind is calmed that we can think properly. When the mind is emotionally agitated, we cannot think properly. So we can think properly only when our mind is calmed. That is how the mind becomes wise. The wisdom comes only when the mind is calm and tranquil. That wisdom of the mind is what is called panya or prajna. Prajna is the Sanskrit form and panya is the Pali form. So the important thing is the mind has two parts. One is the emotional part, and the other is the thinking part. The Buddha had two names for these two parts of the mind. The thinking part is called mano, and the emotional part is called chitta. We should make the emotional part tranquil and the thinking part wise. The wisdom comes from the thinking part. So developing these two parts is samadhi and panya. Samadhi is to calm the emotional part, and panya is to make the thinking part wise. So this is the teaching of the Buddha. And it is this teaching of the Buddha can solve the problem of existence, which is the insecurity of life, where the mind begins to clash with the realities of life. When the mind is properly developed, the mind does not clash with the realities of life. So that is the teaching of the Buddha. And we can gain freedom from all suffering by following the teachings of the Buddha, first taking refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma and the Sangha, then disciplining our behavior, then calming the mind and understanding the realities of life. So I hope you understood, and if you have any questions, you can ask now.
Good morning, Bhante. I'd like to ask, can wisdom arise by itself when you are at a samadhi stage, or you still need to listen to Dhamma talks and learn externally?
Well, there are two kinds of meditation you may have heard. One is called samatha bhavana and the other is called vipassana. Samatha is to calm the mind, and vipassana is to get the wisdom. These are two forms of meditation But that meditation has to be done first by disciplining our behavior. So in the meditation there are 3 stages: disciplining the behavior, calming the mind, and improving our understanding, knowledge.
Good morning, Bhante. Could you please elaborate more about Chitta, the emotional mind, and Manu, the thinking mind, and what is the difference between these two minds?
Somehow I don't get what you're saying. I don't know.
Oh, Bhante, could you please elaborate more about the Chitta, emotional mind? What is emotional mind? And what is the Manu, the thinking mind? And what is the difference between the Chitta and Manu? Thank you.
Well, we have to start by realizing that we are what are called organisms in an environment. Our body is like a machine. The body is an organism in an environment. So when we talk about the mind is not a thing separate from the body. What we call the mind is an activity of the body. And in modern scientific terminology, we have 3 words that the Buddha used: Chitta, Mano, and Vijnana. Now, our body is made of 5 senses: the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the body itself as a sense organ. When light falls on the eye, we see. When sounds coming to the ear, we hear. Smells coming to the nose, we smell. Taste coming to the tongue, we taste. And touch coming to the body, we feel the touch. These are the senses which are stimulated by the environment, and the senses react to the stimulus. And this reaction of the senses to the stimulus is what is called seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. And these things have a name called perception. Eye perception, ear perception, nose perception, tongue perception, body perception. That perception the Buddha called Vijnana. The word that the Buddha used was Vijnana. Vijnana is the perception. Now, what is perceived is carried to the brain. through nerves. The optic nerve carries messages from the eye to the brain. The auditory nerve carries messages from the ear to the brain. Olfactory nerve carries messages from the nose to the brain. And so on. There are nerves carrying, which are like telephone wires, carrying messages from the senses to the brain. And the brain, there is a part of the brain called the cerebrum or the cerebral cortex that does the thinking. That is what the Buddha called mano. What the Buddha called mano is that thinking part of the brain. And the thinking part gives meaning to what was seen or heard or smelt or tasted or touched. And according to the meaning given, an emotion is aroused in the form of a desire or hatred or fear or worry. These are emotional excitements. That emotional arousal is the chitta. So the chitta is the emotional arousal. But the arousal is called chitta vega. Avega means the emotional arousal. But the emotional state is what we call in English the mood or the temperament. That is the emotional state. So the emotional state can be excited or it can be calm and tranquil. Normally the emotions are calm, but when it is excited, there is a desire or a hatred or a fear or a worry. And when the emotions are excited, that is expressed in action, in speech or in behavior. That action part is what is called karma or karma. What is called karma is the behavior part. Now, in this behavior part, there is a difference between the animals and the human being. Now, for example, a dog. When some stranger comes, the dog will begin to bark. Now, the human being has this ability to think and decide whether to act emotionally with anger or fear or you can also act calmly and talk to the stranger. So that ability is for the human being, and that ability is what is called chetana or willpower. The human being has this willpower or chetana, and this is why the Buddha said the real karma is in that chetana, the decision that you make before you begin to act.
Any more questions for Bhante? No more questions, then we'd like to invite Bhante to share on the sharing of marriage, to perform the sharing of marriage.
No questions, huh? Okay, so we'll bring this to an end. Today, by listening to the Dhamma, you have improved your knowledge of the Dhamma, and also you have produced good thoughts and purity of mind. May these good wishes and purity of mind help every one of you to gain freedom from all sufferings of samsara and attain the highest and most supreme bliss of nirvana. Say sadhu, sadhu. Let us also share the merits with all departed relatives, friends, and all beings by reciting Idang me ñāti nang hotu Sukita hontu ñātayo Idang me ñāti nang hotu Sukita hontu ñātayo Idang me ñāti nang hotu Sukita hontu ñātayo. May the powers of all the merits that you have gained help all devas and all beings, and may every one of you ultimately reach the highest and most supreme bliss of nirvana. Say sadhu, sadhu. Abhivadana silissa niccang vaddapacayino chattaro dhamma vaddanti ayuvanno sukhang balang Ayurarogya sambatti sagga sambatti mevacha ato nibbana sampatti iminate samijjatu.
Sadhu, sadhu,
Okay.
sadhu.